So I thought it was about time I did a rescue mission on another one of my childhood toys. Enter the frame, Deltic 22. This isn't going to be me trying to put everything right that's wrong with this model, because quite frankly, the only way to do that would be to put it in the bin and buy an Akira scale one. But that wouldn't be a particularly interesting video. So we'll get that back. Yes, well, we'll try and fix everything that's broken on this one. Mainly the chassis, because that's in a bit of a bad way. The body we can do something with, I'm sure we can repaint that. I did do some detailing many years ago, filled in the side windows but never painted them. As we've got the body out and we're looking at it, we'll do some remedial work on it, as in remove the nameplate that hasn't fallen off many years ago. Where it's gone, nobody knows. We'll have to find for some replacements. I can drill out the milliput that I put in to fill the windows in. I can repair the bit that I've just broken. Because of this seemingly chaotic way that I work, nothing is in the order that it should be. So for a more linear story, the next thing to do is to break down the rest of it, including the bogies and the motor. The body, glazing and bogie side frames were then treated to a 15-minute bath in isopropyl alcohol. This got pretty much all of the factory applied paint off. It didn't get off the paint that I'd put on when I was a lot younger. So it was then treated to an overnight foamy bath in a plastic bag covered in Mr. Muscle oven cleaner. I expect a few of you will be reaching for the keyboard, typing something like, "You should be wearing gloves doing that." Well, don't worry yourself. It was a 2-point plan, because overnight I robbed a bank, and this was the easiest way to get rid of fingerprints. Using masking tape and a pencil, I then estimated how much reconstruction work I had to do on the chassis to get it to be right. I could have gone on eBay and just bought a second-hand replacement chassis, but I didn't want to rob two banks. After a lot of head scratching and pondering, I eventually started to cut some pieces out and got them attached to the rest of the chassis. Glued and set in place, it was then a case of filing and shaping, until eventually I thought it was ready to insert into the body to see if it would fit. I was probably about a half a millimetre short on the length, but the most important measurement of all was spot on when I inserted the bogie, or the motor bogie, to see if it would fit and swivel freely. Which it did. First time, no filing or adjustment to fit. Back to the body, and one of the common issues is buffers with Lima locos, because if you didn't glue them in, they would get lost. But if you did glue them on, the chances are they would get busted off. So that's what's happened to most of these ones. So I first start off by filing everything flat to the end of the buffer shank, and then finding the center with a pinpoint, drilling it out with a small drill, and then repeating the process with a 1.9 drill. If I need to go 2 millimeters, I can, because you haven't drilled out to 2 mil. I guessed I got this model about 1980, but I wasn't entirely sure. So I asked my friend, Slim Boy Fat, Berwick's finest. He's a Lima specialist, guru type person, who gave me the following information that's on the screen now, regarding when this model was first produced. This would have been one of the last railway models I got in that era, as shortly after I lost interest in railways in general and moved into more military modelling, as in tanks and armoured cars. So the few upgrades that I am going to do to this model are the ones that I would have been more than capable of doing when I first got it, but didn't. In saying that, I did repaint one of these way back when, but it was shocking. I've still got it somewhere. I'll see if I can find it and you can tell. I'm still no painter, but I'm a lot better than what I used to be. Bear that last statement in mind in about a minute. Now, some time ago, I did exclaim in a video that I struggled painting yellow, and one of you told me that I should try base coating in pink first. So this is me having a go at that method. And it seemed to work out okay, which was great, but pointless, as my attempt at painting the blue on this model was an absolute disaster. And I ended up stripping the whole thing back to plastic and starting again. It cost me a day, but it didn't really matter because in that day I was still waiting for a consignment of transfers and nameplates from Fox Transfers. Applied in the usual way, removing the transfers from the backing paper with some warm water, mopping up with some tissue paper and a cotton bud, and then sealing them all in with some gloss varnish. Another modification that I did when I was younger was to put a piece of clear plastic in the route indicator box, although that didn't turn out great because I didn't have access to craft knives or set squares, just a pair of scissors. With all the inaccuracies with this model, the primary one being it's about 8mm too short, a scale 2 feet, it would probably be foolish to go out and spend an absolute fortune on detailing parts to correct everything that's wrong with it. Buying a decent quality set of paintbrushes and picking out all of the details that are on this model would be a better use of resources. Better still would be to save up and go out and buy a newer, more up-to-date, more detailed model. The few things that I've done to this one still aren't going to make it win any prizes, but that's not my aim. I'm doing this to, one, restore a childhood possession to its sort of former glory, and to use it as a guinea pig for weathering, use it as a guinea pig for some weathering techniques that I want to try out on some of my expensive Akira scale models. To assist in that process, I'm going to turn my attention back to the bogies and the chassis, transforming them from shiny black bare plastic into nice, dull, blank canvases for various different types of weathering, using our old friend Not Black. And to enable this thing to run on my current layout, which is full of Code 75 track, I'm going to have to dispense with the old Lima pizza cutter wheels and replace them with some new ones that I got from Peter's Spares. Before installing them, I spent a good while cleaning all of the dirt and crud that had accumulated over the last 40 plus years using some IPA. Without wanting to be too controversial, I'm going to say that the motor on this loco would probably been all right. It's a bit filthy, but it should have worked. However, the Lima motor is something that I've detested for as long as I've been involved with model railways. And because these days it's so cheap and easy to find a replacement, it's out and a new one is in. I'll leave a link in the description to the motor I got and also to other things that I've mentioned in this video. I also put some extra pickups on the trailing bogie. Without getting too deep in the weeds on this one, I want to leave that for a separate video where I'll deal with just the chassis and the upgrades that you can do to it, because otherwise this video would be twice as long as it already is. Another one of my pet hates for Lima locos was the way that the wires just seemed to float about willy-nilly all around the interior. So on this one, I've done a quick job of clipping them into some sort of neat order and moving on to the weathering, which is much more interesting. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but before I painted the blue, I painted the front window surrounds in a silver colour, steel or aluminium. Now, I'm using a file here, but I would have been much better off using a blunt hobby knife to just chip away the blue paint to leave the window surrounds in the silver that's underneath. This was a very distinct characteristic of most of the locos that were running in the mid to late 70s. It does look quite bright at the moment and quite a bit in your face, but subsequent weathering techniques that we're going to do in a minute will tone that down significantly. The simplicity of the Lima locos makes the next bit really easy. Taking the body off and the glazing out, stuffing the body with a nice big tissue will enable us to do all of the weathering without getting any of the glazing filthy. Starting off by using a dark wash as a panel lining in all of the grills, going around all of them to make sure that there's some pigment in all of the grooves. I'm sure as the processes go on that they'll get filled up anyway, but this is like an insurance policy to make sure that they are filled. The close-up reveals that there is a fair amount of detail on this model, even though it's 45 plus years old. Now, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. When it comes to weathering and stuff like this, I have literally no idea what I'm doing. It's a case of making it up as you go along and hoping for the best. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, wipe it off and start again. So I'm going to start like I normally start all of my engines and coaches, which is a thin coat of brake dust on the lower third of the vehicle. And typically on camera you can't really see it, only in certain directions when the light hits it. Just before it had dried completely, I give it an inspection to see how it was turning out, and I wasn't happy with it because it had gone on just a little bit too heavy. So I wiped it all off with a damp, flat brush. Not all of it came off, which was good because it gives that impression of it being filthy, cleaned layers, which is what weathering is all about. So they keep telling me, apparently. The roof was fairly easy and I was quite happy with the way that turned out as a base coat. And then I moved on to the characteristic splattering of oil that spews out of the exhaust ports on these engines. First off, experimenting with some gloss black flicked onto the model via way of a brush and a cocktail stick. It sort of worked, but it was a bit too thick and not very accurate, so I ended up wiping that off. I then tried using a slightly thicker paint and then streaking it with a damp brush, but that didn't work out quite how I intended it to either, so that came off. Next I tried dotting the paint on with the cocktail stick, and which was a little bit more controllable, but a little bit sanitized, is that the right word? And then streaking that as well, and it still didn't turn out how I wanted it to do. So again, I just wiped it all off. What I'm going to say now is going to be completely mad. So I ended up dry brushing a wash. Yeah, I know, it sounds ridiculous, but that's what I did. It took a while to get the flicking motion of the brush in the right direction and the right strength, how it touched the model, but eventually I managed to get it to look something all right. With products that go on really wet, it's really difficult to tell how it's going to plan out once it's dried off a bit. And once it did, I was not happy with the result. So firstly, I loaded a brush with some thinners to see if I could streak it out a little bit more, but that wasn't quite enough. So I ended up with a cotton bud, just wiping a lot more off. And the staining that resulted ended up being a lot better than anything that I'd sort of envisaged. I had a similar sort of experience with the white residue that comes off of the window wiper washers, which on some of these engines is really quite pronounced, but on others is really quite subtle. Using some artist's oil paints, I put a big daub in the corner of the window and then just kept streaking it out, and did it again to get more layers. So in this whole process, I probably took off about 90% of all of the product that I put on and ended up with the staining that left behind as being the weathering that was more desirable than the actual product that was put on. Maybe it's another one of those less is more lessons. To break up the monotonous blandness of the fuel tanks, I decided to do some streaking on that as well with some fuel and oil stains. This will get toned down again later on with another light pass of brake dust, as will the bogies after we've done some dry brushing with some Humbrol metal coat. Once you've opened the tin of this for the first time, it doesn't take that long for the liquid to evaporate, and all you're left with is a large lump of pigment at the bottom, and it's quite squidgy for quite some time. Just keep reactivating it with some thinners. Then once it's dried to whatever you've applied it to, you can, about a day later when it's completely dry, go over it with a bare finger and just give it a little polish, and it will come up and give a nice metallic sheen, which was a sort of effect I was going for on the roof as well, because it was looking a little bit bland. So with some metallic pigment, it's just brushing some extra stuff over the top, just to represent all of the carbon that comes out of the exhaust. No matter what I've done to this model, it's still only going to be a Lima Deltic, worth around 30 quid. What it has done though is given me some valuable practice for when I tackle the weathering on my really expensive Acura scale model. Because we've been dealing with the Deltic, I thought it would be fitting to triangulate my thoughts before putting this model into revenue earning service.